Welcome to This Explainer. Look, if you're a quantitative researcher or a financial analyst right now, you know we're basically living in the middle of a massive arms race. I mean, every single week, there's some new wild claim about artificial intelligence completely conquering the stock market. Well, today, we're cutting straight through that hype. We're going to look at the hard empirical realities of massive time-series foundation models, or TSFMs, and pit them against locally trained neural baselines in quantitative finance. So the big question: are these massive AI models actually the ultimate alpha engines we've been waiting for, or are we just throwing wildly expensive compute at pure market noise? Let's find out. Okay, here's our game plan. We'll map out the forecasting landscape, dig into the semi-martingale reality of the market, and define our absolute loss benchmarks. Then we'll introduce our AI contenders, get to the empirical verdict, and wrap up with some highly actionable takeaways for your daily workflow.
All right, Section 1, the AI forecasting landscape.
Let's be real, forecasting daily liquid equities is just brutal. It's the ultimate stress test for any machine learning architecture. We're dealing with exceptionally low signal-to-noise ratios. That means any tiny, true predictive edge you might have is buried under an absolute avalanche of random market movements. And then you add in constant structural breaks, weak persistence, and those terrifying heavy-tailed distributions where 5 sigma extreme events happen way more often than they should. All of this creates a landscape that easily tricks standard AI into overfitting. You've probably experienced this yourself, right? A backtest looks absolutely brilliant, right up until a sudden regime change completely destroys the model's perceived edge.
Moving right along to Section 2, the semi-martingale market reality. Before we even try to grade the AI, we really need to understand the rigorous math governing the market itself. In advanced stochastic modeling, we rely on the semi-martingale framework. Specifically, Dub's decomposition mathematically splits asset returns into 2 totally distinct parts. First, you have an unpredictable martingale, which is pure, unadulterated market noise. Second, you have a predictable drift component. For any analyst out there building a predictive model, that predictable drift is literally the only part of the return profile you can actually exploit for profit. Everything else? Just static. And here's the rub. In a highly liquid market, that predictable drift is essentially zero. Because of this, under the martingale difference hypothesis, a simple zero-return random walk isn't just some naive, lazy baseline, it's actually the mathematically optimal predictor. Any AI model claiming to have a true informational edge absolutely must prove it can reliably beat this random walk baseline.
Which brings us to Section 3, absolute loss and heavy tails.
Now, this is a trap I see quantitative teams fall into all the time. Most AI foundation models are trained using squared loss, which targets the conditional mean. But in finance, those heavy equity tails, those massive unexpected market swings, will wildly skew a squared loss model because it exponentially punishes outliers. This is exactly why a rigorous financial benchmark has to utilize absolute loss, or mean absolute error. Absolute loss targets the conditional median. It's highly robust. That means a single extreme market day won't trick you into thinking your model is suddenly a genius or completely broken. I mean, try explaining to your PM why your model blew up just because of one volatile earnings day. That's exactly what squared loss does to you.
Because the random walk unconditionally minimizes absolute error, beating it is, well, exceptionally hard. You literally cannot cheat the mean absolute error metric by just rescaling or recentering your forecasts to look artificially better. The model either extracts genuine, conditional signal from the data, or it loses to the random walk, period. Okay, Section 4, pre-trained versus local baselines. Let's introduce the heavyweights stepping into the ring today. In the left corner, representing global general knowledge, we have massive pre-trained time-series foundation models, or TSFMs, like Google's TimesFM, Amazon's Chronos, and TimeGPT. These act as inductive priors. They've already learned general forecasting patterns from billions of data points across massive, completely unrelated external data sets before they ever even look at our stock data. Over in the right corner, representing hyper-local specific expertise, we have local neural baselines like iTransformer and CAN. These are trained completely from scratch. They learn solely and exclusively from the specific history of the single asset they are trying to predict. So we're basically testing if broad macroeconomic patterns learned elsewhere can beat deep, isolated asset history. To keep things completely fair and avoid any accidental data leakage, both approaches have to play by strict rules. They're restricted to an equal 512-point context budget, and they have to forecast out a 20-business-day horizon, so basically one full trading month. We evaluate them using a rolling origin protocol, walking forward through time across 5 highly liquid U.S. equities: Apple, Amazon, Google, JP Morgan, and Meta. No peeking into the future whatsoever.
All right, Section 5, the empirical verdict. Let's look at the actual numbers. Okay, looking at the high-level task wins, massive pre-training actually seems to pay off. Pre-trained TSFMs dominate the relative ranking distribution. They took home 8 out of the 10 asset-level tasks evaluated across both linear and log returns. So if you're forced to pick a practical default right out of the box to kick off your research, the foundation models are showing a clear edge in raw ranking. But when we drill down into specific assets, things get interesting. TimesFM-2.5 leads on Apple and JP Morgan, while Moirai-2.0 and Kronos take Google and Amazon. However, look at the exception with Meta. The local iTransformer baseline actually manages to win both tasks there. This is a super vital caveat for your modeling team. Local, supervised learning can, and absolutely does, outperform generic pre-training depending on the specific asset's quirks and the current market regime. These foundation models aren't some universal silver bullet across every single ticker.
Now, ranking models against each other is one thing, but here's the million-dollar question. Literally, for any financial analyst whose bonus depends on actual profitability, do these top-ranked AI models consistently beat that simple zero-return random walk we talked about earlier? The harsh reality? The theoretical predictability bound in these liquid markets is just incredibly low. For these models, the out-of-sample R-squared typically falls below 1% for liquid daily equities. Just let that sink in for a second. Even the absolute most sophisticated AI models in the world, running on massive compute, are literally fighting for a fraction of a percent of true informational edge. To actually prove this, researchers ran a rigorous one-sided Diebold-Mariano test. In plain English, this test checks if a model's improvement over the random walk is statistically significant, or if it's just a lucky streak. And the result? Significant improvement is incredibly sparse. Out of all the tests they ran, only 2 specific instances, Kronos on Amazon and Moirai-2.0 on Google, actually demonstrated a statistically significant edge over that naive random walk. Which brings us to Section 6, Takeaways for Financial Analysts. So, what are your pragmatic, day-to-day takeaways here? First, time series foundation models are fantastic, highly cost-effective, inductive priors. If you're dealing with a low-data environment, or you just need a strong, robust baseline deployed fast, use them. They will drastically reduce your model development time. Second, do not throw away your local architectures. As we saw with Meta, they can definitely still win in specific regimes where local asset history matters way more than global patterns. Sometimes an asset just dances to its own unique drumbeat. And finally, recognize that neither approach guarantees an absolute, easily exploitable market edge. The source material astutely sums it up. The evidence absolutely supports TSFMs as incredibly useful practical priors, but emphatically not as universal engines of statistically reliable alpha generation. They are highly sophisticated tools, for sure, but they are not crystal balls. It leaves us with a pretty provocative thought, doesn't it? As we keep building more and more massive AI models, are we perhaps expecting just a little too much magic from general artificial intelligence in a mathematically constrained, fundamentally noise-dominated market? Definitely something to think about the next time you see a pitch for a purely AI-driven alpha fund. Thanks so much for joining me on this explainer.